I am a social activist and I am political. And so I'm more into action and not really the kind of
So how should that
attacking
action?
one another over things.
How should that action materialize though? What is a viable path? What does that action look like in practice in your mind?
I always thought we would use I always thought we would use Facebook and other social media as ways to organize and look to the past for clues on how to move forward. But I'm never gonna sit here and just criticize, liberation theologians, and I'm certainly not gonna sit here and criticize King and argue back and forth about these people who sacrifice and work for their communities, because a lot of us just don't.
But
So
Vicky,
I'm not really gonna go back and forth
wouldn't
about
you
King. That's one of my.
but wouldn't you
Is he
say
a
though,
deity?
Vicky?
Of course he's not a deity.
Neil, can I ask
King
you a
is not a
question,
Yeah,
Neil?
deity.
go ahead, go ahead.
He's a human
Can I ask you a
being.
question, Neil?
But I do respect his journey as someone who knew he wanted to fight for his people, but didn't know which way to go. And I really appreciate his journey. In the end, he admitted he made some mistakes, but I'm not going to sit up here and bash him, with none of this nonsense. And we're not doing anything on his level anywhere that I know of. So I'm not really into this kind of.
You see, I'll say it again, Neil. Notice how, with all due respect, Vicky continues to beg the question because, again, she is assuming that what she is saying is correct and we are to deal with the issue on her terms. When she says things like what Dr. King did for his community, again, it begs the question, who are you to say, first and foremost, that King actually did something positive for his community? How many other people that were around back then, or particularly those that preceded MLK, like a Booker T. Washington, or like someone else who was a rival of MLK, a man by the name of Joseph H. Jackson, who MLK could not unseat because Joseph H. Jackson was far more popular than MLK.
Yeah.
And the people at the National Baptist Convention rejected King because they
Okay,
knew he
Chuck,
wasn't.
Chuck,
Hold
let
on,
me
whoa,
say.
whoa, 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 hold on,
Go ahead. I'm
hold on.
sorry. Go ahead,
Again,
brother.
that's just a question.
That's a good
Why
question.
is Joseph H. Jackson relegated to a footnote, but MLK is up here? That's something that needs to be unpacked.
That is a great question, Vicky. Joseph H. Jackson. Are you familiar with the name?
No.
Okay. All right. Randy, what about you?
Yeah, just on the surface. And so what he was trying to do initially, yes, it did rival King. So I agree with that.
Yeah. And Joseph H. Jackson, you can say, well, I say Joseph H. Jackson, he had the way. He knew the way. In the so-called Black community, such as it is, they were more partial to Joseph H. Jackson's vision than, say, Dr. King's. Part of the problem in the 1960s was not the racial divide. The problem in the 1960s was the age divide, which is why Martin Luther King Jr., he courted the allegiance of the youth because the parents of the young folk in the 1950s and the 1960s wanted no part of MLK because they knew, again, he was a troublemaker. Yeah. And this is when you had other activists such as Ella Baker working along with communists like Howard Zinn to draw a connection between the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and the youth wing, as they called it, of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, which was SNCC. Now, of course, if you know anything about SNCC, so it's funny, we're sitting up here debating and having these conversations about, well, who's a radical and who's this and was King this and was King that. Well, we automatically know there is no debate about what a man like Stokely Carmichael was all about, or a man like H. Trap Brown was all about. There's no denying that. So what is MLK doing commingling with a man in Stokely Carmichael? Because Stokely Carmichael, again, there was a whole, anyway, Neil, just for 1 second, going back, like Vicky just said, that she's not going to bash anyone who is a proponent of liberation theology and this, and the third. Here's a quote of James Cone when he speaks of Christianity, so-called theologian. The Christian faith does not possess in its nature the means for analyzing the structure of capitalism. Marxism as a tool of social analysis can disclose the gap between appearance and reality, and thereby help Christians to see how things really are. So why would the father of Black liberation theology in James Cone say that it is Marxism that can usurp or trump the Christian's perspective when it comes to trying to understand how the world really is? Because we're dealing with, we are existing within the context of this so-called capitalism. I call it the free market system, or better yet, capitalism is the only so-called economic system that is in fact commensurate with the principle of natural rights. So according to James Cone, Marxism is how the Christians see the world when it comes to evaluating the economic system.